the night of April 19th, 2026, settled over the Strait of Hormuz like a held breath, heavy, tense, and waiting to break. The sea was calm, almost deceptively so, its dark surface reflecting nothing but fragments of starlight and the faint glow of distant vessel lights. But beneath that stillness, something far more dangerous was unfolding. At the center of it all sat the USS Abraham Lincoln, 100,000 tons of steel, nuclear power, and American dominance. It wasn't just a ship. It was a floating command of authority, surrounded by a layered shield of destroyers, submarines, and aircraft, all positioned in a tight defensive formation. For 11 days straight, this strike group had enforced a chokehold on Iranian oil exports, turning one of the world's most critical shipping lanes into a controlled battlefield. Inside the Combat Information Center, the atmosphere was sharp and controlled, but beneath it ran a current of unease. Radar screens glowed with movement, cargo ships stalled in place, fishing vessels drifting in uncertain loops, and several Iranian naval ships pacing just beyond the invisible boundary line. Every blip meant something. Every movement was being watched. Orders had changed earlier that morning. No one was to fire first, but no one was allowed to fall back either. It was the kind of directive that left no room for mistakes and no margin for survival if things went wrong. What the officers inside that room didn't know, what no satellite, analyst, or intelligence agency had picked up, was that they were already inside a carefully designed trap. Hundreds of miles away, beneath layers of reinforced rock in the Zagros Mountains, the operation had been planned in silence over the course of 9 months. It wasn't rushed. It wasn't reactive. It was deliberate. Its architect, a senior commander within Iran's naval forces, had built the strategy around one core belief. You don't defeat a superior force head-on. You make it blind, overwhelm it, and strike from angles it cannot predict. And the first piece of that plan was already in position. It looked like nothing. A chemical tanker, sitting quietly among dozens of other civilian vessels caught in the blockade. Its identification systems were clean. Its cargo records checked out. Its movements were slow, unremarkable, and perfectly consistent with every other stranded ship in the area. For 6 days, it had done nothing. That was the point, because beneath its ordinary exterior, hidden under layers of legitimate cargo containers, was something entirely different. Reinforced compartments had been welded into its structure. Inside them sat anti-ship missile systems, compact, concealed, and ready to deploy within seconds. No crew movement would give it away. No radar anomaly would raise suspicion. Everything about it had been designed to blend into the noise. At 3:17 in the morning, the signal was sent. It didn't come from the ship itself. Instead, it was transmitted from above, relayed through a small drone flying high enough to disappear into civilian air traffic patterns. The signal was brief, encrypted, invisible to anything not specifically looking for it. And then, nothing for a fraction of a second. On the surface, the tanker remained still. No alarms, no visible change. But inside, mechanical systems activated instantly. Hydraulic locks released. Hidden panels split open with precise synchronization. Within seconds, the concealed launch systems were exposed, rising from beneath the cargo containers like something waking up. For missiles armed themselves almost simultaneously. Their targeting systems locked onto a heat signature, one that stood out unmistakably against the cold surface of the sea. The USS Abraham Lincoln. At a distance of just over 10 nautical miles, the missiles didn't need much time. They launched in rapid succession from the deck of a ship that, moments ago, had been nothing more than a harmless cargo vessel, for streaks of fire tore into the darkness, cutting across the horizon at low altitude. Back on the American destroyer positioned closest to the threat, the radar system reacted instantly. Warnings exploded across the screens. Inbound missiles, low altitude, high speed, time to impact, less than 90 seconds. The comm inside the command center shattered. Training took over. Commands were issued faster than conscious thought. Interceptors were launched within seconds, rising into the sky to meet the incoming threat. Defensive systems locked on, calculating trajectories with machine precision. The first interception came quickly. 2 missiles were destroyed at range, their explosions lighting up the night sky in brief flashes of orange. The third was hit much closer, close enough that fragments rained down onto the carrier's deck, tearing through equipment and injuring crew members who had been caught in the open. But the fourth missile, that one made it through. It struck one of the escorting destroyers along its side, detonating on impact. The explosion tore through the ship's structure, ripping open metal and sending fire into compartments below. Within seconds, the vessel began to list, alarms screaming across every deck. The strike group had just taken its first real hit, and that was only the beginning, because the attack wasn't meant to end there. It was designed to evolve. As damage control teams scrambled to contain fires and assess casualties, new threats began to emerge, almost simultaneously, as if triggered by the same invisible clock. A distress signal suddenly broadcast from the attacking tanker. A legal obligation. A trap. At the same time, fast-moving contacts appeared on radar, small, rapid, and approaching from a direction that had previously been considered low risk. They moved in groups, spreading out as they advanced, not aiming for the carrier, aiming for what would come next. Rescue operations. Because the strategy was simple and brutally effective. When an enemy is wounded, they will try to save themselves, and that is when they are most vulnerable. But even that wasn't the most dangerous part. Beneath the surface of the water, something else had already moved into position. Silent, slow, almost invisible. A small submarine, positioned closer than anyone would have believed possible, had been waiting patiently. For days, it had crept forward using minimal power, staying hidden beneath layers of water that distorted sonar detection. Now, it was within striking distance, close enough that a single successful attack could change everything. Back aboard the carrier, the tactical picture was becoming chaotic. Multiple threats, multiple directions, limited time, and no clear indication of which one mattered most. Every decision now carried consequences. Respond too slowly, and the situation would spiral out of control. React too aggressively, and they could fall directly into the trap that had been set for them. For a brief moment, everything balanced on a knife's edge, and the people responsible for making those decisions knew it, because what they were facing wasn't just an attack. It was a layered, coordinated operation designed to stretch them thin, confuse their priorities, and force them into making the wrong move. The Strait of Hormuz was no longer just a strategic location. It had become something far more dangerous. A battlefield where every civilian vessel could be a weapon, every signal could be a deception, and every second could decide who survives the next phase. The moment the fourth missile struck, the illusion of control shattered. Fire spread through the damaged destroyer in violent bursts, feeding on fuel lines and electrical systems as thick smoke climbed into the night sky. Damage control teams rushed in immediately, sealing compartments, dragging the wounded, fighting flames that seemed to grow faster than they could contain them. The ship wasn't sinking, but it was bleeding capability. And in modern naval warfare, losing capability is the first step toward losing everything. Inside the carrier's command center, the situation had already crossed into something far more dangerous than a single strike. The tactical display no longer showed a clean, manageable battlefield. It showed chaos, layered, overlapping, and accelerating. The distress signal from the tanker kept broadcasting, loud, persistent, legally binding. Ignoring it wasn't just a moral decision. It carried international consequences. But responding to it meant committing resources, exposing ships, and potentially walking straight into the second layer of the trap. At the same time, the fast-moving swarm on radar was closing distance rapidly. Small vessels, high speed, unpredictable movement patterns. They weren't designed to survive. They were designed to overwhelm. Each one represented a problem, not individually, but collectively. Too many targets, too little time, and too many possible angles of attack. They could carry explosives, rockets, or worse. And even if only a few made it through, that was enough. But beneath all of that noise, beneath the visible threats, was the one element that truly mattered. The submarine. It hadn't fired yet, which meant it was waiting. And that waiting was far more dangerous than any missile already in the air. The sonar teams had only seconds to refine the contact. Data came in fragments, depth estimates, acoustic distortions, inconsistent returns caused by thermal layers in the water. It wasn't a clear picture, but it was enough. Close range, Too close. On the carrier, the decision had to be made without hesitation. There was no time to request confirmation, no time to escalate up the chain of command. Communication delays alone would make the response irrelevant, so the authority shifted to the people in that room. Weapons were authorized. Anti-submarine helicopters already in the air adjusted course instantly, diving toward the suspected location. Sonobuoys hit the water, creating a scattered web of listening points. Within seconds, torpedoes were deployed, not aimed at a precise target, but at a calculated zone designed to box the submarine in. It was a gamble, one that depended on prediction more than certainty. Underwater, the explosion came as a shockwave rather than a sound, a violent pressure surge that tore through the surrounding water. It didn't destroy the submarine outright, but it didn't need to. Systems failed. Controls jammed. The carefully maintained silence was gone. And just like that, the hunter became visible. But even that moment of success didn't solve the larger problem, because while attention shifted underwater, the surface threat continued to close in. The fast attack swarm was now minutes away, closer than comfort, closer than safety. Each vessel moved with aggressive intent, weaving across the water at speeds that made targeting difficult. They didn't follow predictable paths. They didn't maintain formation. They behaved like chaos. And chaos is hard to stop. The strike group's defensive layers began to engage. Long-range weapons first, then mid-range, then close-in systems preparing for what might break through. But the numbers mattered, and the attackers knew it. Their objective wasn't to win a clean fight. It was to create overload, to push defenses beyond their limits, to force simultaneous decisions, to stretch response times just enough for something to slip through. For a few seconds, it looked like that might actually happen. The command center filled with overlapping reports, distances shrinking, weapon systems cycling, threat priorities shifting faster than they could be fully processed. And then something changed. High above the battlefield, far beyond the range of most visible action, a different system had already been watching. Quiet, detached, unaffected by the immediate chaos below. It had seen everything, tracked everything, and now it provided clarity. Data flowed in, precise, clean, uninterrupted. Suddenly, the swarm wasn't just a cluster of unknown threats. It was a mapped formation. Every movement predicted seconds ahead of time. And that changed everything. Because once chaos becomes predictable, it becomes vulnerable. The response came from above. Aircraft already in position adjusted course slightly, releasing their payloads from high altitude. The weapons didn't rush toward the target. They didn't need to. They glided, silent, guided not by onboard sensors alone, but by a continuous stream of real-time targeting updates. And when they reached the calculated release point, they didn't strike as a single impact. They fragmented. Dozens of submunitions spread across the water, each one designed to find and destroy individual targets within the swarm. The effect was immediate. Explosions tore across the surface in rapid succession, each one precise, each one calculated. Boats were destroyed mid-movement, others disabled, their speed instantly gone. The formation broke apart, not strategically, but instinctively. Survival replaced coordination, and without coordination, the attack lost its edge. Within seconds, the majority of the swarm was gone. The few that remained turned away, abandoning the approach entirely. The second layer of the trap had failed, but the situation was far from over. Back beneath the surface, the damaged submarine made a decision of its own. It surfaced, not as a tactical maneuver, as surrender. Compressed air vented violently as it rose, its hull visibly damaged, systems failing. Crew pushed beyond operational limits. A signal was transmitted, clear, unmistakable. The attack from below was over. For now. On the surface, recovery operations began almost immediately. Boarding teams moved toward the compromised tanker, securing what remained of it. The hidden launch systems were found, empty, exposed, undeniable proof of how the attack had been executed. And more importantly, evidence that it had been planned, carefully, deliberately. This wasn't a random escalation. It was phase one, and that realization carried weight, far beyond the immediate battlefield. Because if there was a phase one, there was a phase two. Hours hadn't passed, not even close. But already, signals intelligence began to pick up new activity further inland. Movement, activation, systems coming online that had remained silent before. The kind of systems that weren't defensive. The kind designed for escalation. Back in the command center, the atmosphere had changed again. Not calmer, not safer, just different. The immediate threats had been handled, but the larger picture had become far more dangerous. Because now, both sides understood something clearly. This wasn't an isolated clash. It was the opening move. The Strait of Hormuz was no longer just a contested waterway. It had become a trigger point, a place where miscalculation could ripple outward, into markets, into alliances, into conflicts far beyond the ships currently in contact. Every vessel in that region now carried a different meaning. Every movement could be interpreted as intent, and every decision, no matter how small, had the potential to escalate into something far larger than anyone initially planned. On the damaged destroyer, fires were still being fought. On the carrier, aircraft were being rearmed. And somewhere beyond the horizon, new pieces were already moving into place. Because Phase 1 had achieved its purpose. Not total destruction, not decisive victory, but something arguably more dangerous. It had proven that the battlefield had changed. That conventional expectations no longer applied. That even the most advanced forces in the world could be surprised, pressured, and pushed into uncertainty. And uncertainty, in a place like this, is the most dangerous condition of all. The question now wasn't who had won the first exchange. The question was what would happen next. Because whatever came in Phase 2, it wouldn't be smaller, it wouldn't be simpler, and it definitely wouldn't be predictable.